Thanks for joining us. Russian President Vladimir Putin has announced a three-day ceasefire in Ukraine from the 8th to the 10th of May. The Kremlin says the pause in fighting coincides with Moscow's World War II Victory Day commemorations. Putin previously announced a surprise truce during the Easter period, but Russia and Ukraine blamed each other for breaching it. Well, shortly, we'll speak to Zein Basravi, who's in Kyiv. But first, let's head to Moscow and Yulia Shapovalova. Moscow, so in response to the previous Easter truce, Zelenskyy proposed a 30-day ceasefire, but Putin didn't accept that. Now he's announcing this three-day Victory Day ceasefire. Why?
Well, that's absolutely right. So probably it indicates that no long truce is possible right now. This means that the negotiations are far from over. Russia insists on its demands. Its demands are met and says that there will be no concessions. But there will be a truce for Victory Day celebrations. As we understand, the ceasefire will last for 3 days. Actually, these Victory Day celebrations are, of course, extremely important for Russia. Russia and the entire world are celebrating the 80th anniversary of victory in World War III this year. So this celebration in Russia, these celebrations are promising to be very vast, and presidents of at least 20 countries are going to arrive in Moscow, are going to attend all the festivities, including President Xi, President Lula da Silva, Premier Narendra Modi, and many, many others. Also, the Ukrainian side is invited to follow suit by Russia. Obviously, the Russian president also said that in a case of violation of this truce, the Kremlin promised a response, effective response to any hostilities from the Ukrainian side. But as we understand, the Ukrainian side has not yet responded to that proposal. As you mentioned, the previous short-term truce was held on Easter. Both sides reported violations of the ceasefire, but despite that, all of them say that generally the ceasefire indeed took place and the situation on the battlefield was much quieter.
Yulia, Russia has weighed into the debate over what shape and form a potential peace deal or a ceasefire could take, especially when it comes to the future of Crimea and parts of eastern Ukraine.
That's right. So we're hearing from Russia's Foreign Minister, Sergei Lavrov, and he says that dialogue between Moscow and Washington continues no matter what. Both sides are trying to find ways for resolving the crisis and finding a solution and finding this peace settlement. But once again, Russia remains adamant. It says that it wants international recognition of the Crimean Peninsula, because Russia says it's Russian territory. Also, it wants to declare Sevastopol, Donetsk, Lugansk, Kherson and Zaporozhye regions, obviously as Russian territory as well. This is one of the key parts of Russia's demands, and obviously also, Lavrov says that the Ukrainian settlement also includes cancellations of all the sanctions against Russia and all the lawsuits and arrest warrants against a number of Russian people, and as well as returning Russian assets, because about $300 billion of Russian assets were frozen in the West when the conflict began back in 2022. And Russia also demands Ukraine's non-accession to NATO and no repressive actions, as it says, against Russian-speaking population in Ukraine, and no pressure on the Russian Orthodox Church in Ukraine. And also, we've heard from Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov. He has reiterated that Russia is ready for direct talks with Ukraine, but Ukraine needs to change its law banning all the negotiations with Russia.
Yulia, many thanks. Yulia Shapovalova in Moscow. Let's go to Kyiv and speak to Zein Basravi. So, Zein, Vladimir Putin now wants a ceasefire to coincide with the May 9th commemorations, marking, of course, the Second World War and Russia's role in it. You know, there's no great legacy of ceasefires, long or short-lasting. Any response from Ukraine to this proposal?
Well, Ukraine's foreign minister, Andriy Sybiha, has just made a statement in response to Putin's extension of a ceasefire, so to speak. He said, if Russia truly wants peace, it must cease fire immediately. Why wait until May 8th if the fire can be ceased now and since any date for 30 days? So it is real, not just for a parade. Ukraine is ready to support a lasting, durable, and full ceasefire, and this is what we're constantly proposing for at least 30 days. Now, the reaction coming from various different spokespeople for Ukraine's military on social media channels is it's far less diplomatic, far more plain speaking, and it has to be said the number of expletives used by official spokespeople along with officers speaking on Telegram really does give you a sense of how little trust there is in anything coming out of Vladimir Putin, anything coming out of Moscow. One officer writes, during the last ceasefire, the Russians, he says, were freely roaming the gray zone, especially on the Eastern Front and along the Zaporizhia Front. They entrenched themselves, and then right after the ceasefire, they used those positions to try and carry out assaults. He said all they did during the so-called ceasefire on Easter Sunday was carry out reconnaissance missions. He also said a real ceasefire is when both sides agree to it, a third party, or even a fourth if necessary, asks as a referee. He described the Russians as clowns, is probably the nicest thing he said in his statement, just want to make it look like they want peace, but in reality they're simply buying time for themselves. The longer a ceasefire drags on, the worse it gets for Ukraine. Another officer said, I'm simply not even going to bother commenting about this ceasefire on Victory Day. It's pure insanity and honestly infuriating. He said, the truth is, even during this so-called ceasefire, our men will keep dying and nothing about it will bring us any closer to peace. Another person described as an attempt for Putin to whitewash himself and display himself as someone who wants peace, but he said that it was simply serving Putin's own interests. Now, from Alexei Honcharenko, an opposition member of parliament, he said something very interesting. He said, Putin continues to play games. Instead of a real ceasefire, he is now announcing something to happen in 10 days. He is trying to present himself as capable of negotiating, and then he addressed President Donald Trump of the United States directly, saying, President Trump, it is time to impose new serious sanctions against Putin, against the Russians. That's the only thing he truly understands. And that's what Ukrainians are petitioning their American allies for now, that what Putin is really afraid of are secondary sanctions, more financial punishment that will make him unpopular among his leaders, among his upper echelons of Russian society, as well as among his people. And that is the kind of pressure Ukrainians say needs to be brought to bear now. So any idea of a ceasefire here is ringing very hollow.
Pretty cynical reaction to anything coming out of Moscow there in Ukraine. Many thanks for that, Zein Basravi.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.